There is nothing more emotionally destructive than the positive energy only perspective. But why? Shouldn't we aim for positivity and good feelings? What's destructive about that? To understand this, imagine that human beings are like trees. Some stand tall with wide trunks and deep roots. Others have thin trunks and shallow root systems. On a sunny day, they all look healthy because there's no wind, no storm, no rain. The calm weather hides their true nature. What happens when a storm appears? Well, the deep-rooted tree stands still, unmoved by strong winds. The shallow-rooted one snaps, tilts, and gets uprooted entirely. In the case of humans, the storm is the negative or toxic people around us, and the roots are consciousness. So the problem is not the storm, but the strength of our roots as the level of our consciousness. The storm only reveals what was already true underneath. Just as tea reveals its flavor when placed in hot water, so too does a person reveal their essence when life burns. But wouldn't it be better to protect the tree from the wind? Initially, yes, a small tree with shallow roots should be protected from extreme weather, but slowly, the tree should be introduced to stronger winds, because the tree does not become strong by being shielded from wind. It becomes strong by facing it. Wind is what forces roots to grow deeper. Resistance is what thickens the trunk. A tree that never faces wind may look peaceful on a sunny day, but it's structurally weak and heavily dependent on outside conditions to survive. So we are like trees. Emotional triggers, fear, loss, uncertainty, conflict. These are the winds of human life. Some people build depth by staying present with them. Others avoid them in the name of positivity. Positive energy only is emotional wind shielding. It trains people to avoid storms instead of strengthening their roots. But isn't positivity a high vibrational state? Yes, positivity is a high vibrational state, but that tells you nothing about your frequency, which is the depth and level of consciousness. Frequency is what determines how stable your vibration, which is your emotional landscape, is under pressure. High frequency looks like a regulated nervous system, low internal resistance, clarity, presence instead of defensiveness, emotional openness, alignment, groundedness, and the ability to hold intensity without collapsing. It doesn't feel like hype or fireworks. It feels like still water. Quiet, steady, and unapologetically real. High-frequency people don't overstimulate others. They stabilize them. Low frequency, by contrast, is a state of reactivity, defensiveness, psychological contradiction, delusion, and avoidance. The higher your frequency, the less your emotional state is hijacked by circumstances. The lower your frequency, the more your emotional state is easily influenced by life events and by other people. That's why low-frequency people become avoidant. Without a grounding center, they are easily moved by the energy around them. This is also why forced positivity often feels hollow. It doesn't arise from depth. It's placed on top of fragility. So how can we raise our frequency and raise the level of our consciousness. In the same way that a tree does not develop deep roots by reaching upward toward the light, you cannot raise your frequency by forcing high, positive moods around you. A tree grows deep roots not by avoiding difficulty, but by descending into darkness, pushing downward into soil that is dense, unseen, cold, and resistant. Roots do not grow in the light. They grow by entering what is hidden and pressurized. The tree becomes stable not because the storm disappears, but because it has penetrated the difficult layers beneath it. We are no different. So what is this darkness we must face to raise our frequency, our capacity to face life's storms and stay centered and unmoved? The darkness is any part of reality that the ego tries to escape. Ask yourself, what truths am I afraid to admit to myself and why? What parts of me have I rejected and shamed in my desperate attempt to fit in? What delusions am I feeding day in and day out just so I can feel good about myself? Facing darkness is authenticity in its rawest form, because both are about one thing: staying with reality instead of escaping it. Liberation is not brightness, it is clarity. Clarity is not positivity, it is reality seen without distortion. Because of this, authenticity is not just a pretty spiritual ideal. It is the mechanical process by which frequency grows. Every time you remain with your real inner state instead of escaping it, your nervous system learns, I can stay with myself through discomfort. That lesson builds internal trust. Internal trust expands your window of tolerance, and a wider window of tolerance creates regulation, coherence, and higher frequency. Now, in contrast, every time you replace reality with performance, numbing, distraction, forced positivity, or self-betrayal, the system learns reality is too much for me. And the system contracts, your capacity shrinks, your frequency weakens. Your vibration, or your emotional state, becomes reactive and easily controlled by whatever happens around you. The unconscious stays unconscious not because it is inherently dark, but because it is continually avoided. What you stay with becomes integrated. What you flee from gains power over you. Shadow is not empowered by attention, it is empowered by rejection. So facing darkness is not a separate dramatic practice, it is simply authenticity without compromise. Now, this is not to shame people with sensitive energy fields. Your sensitivity is not a defect, and it is certainly not your fault, because many of these patterns began long before you had any real choice. When you were still a young tree, you had been placed in an environment full of storms you were never prepared for. Of course, you learned to shield, to people please, to stay hypervigilant, to merge with others. Those were survival strategies. They kept you safe when you had no other tools. But they are no longer useful. No, this is an invitation to gently end avoidance, to become curious about your blind spots, to place loving boundaries where they are needed, and to slowly, at your own pace, expose yourself to what is uncomfortable, not to drown in it, but to discover that you can remain yourself in the middle of it. You're not broken for feeling deeply. You're learning how to root that sensitivity in strength. And for all of that to happen, you don't need to judge your sensitivity as good or bad, superior or inferior. You only need to be honest with yourself. That honesty begins by facing reality and being willing to descend into your own darkness. Facing darkness is authenticity because it means staying with what is real instead of replacing it with a more comfortable story. Truth is not always pleasant in the short term. It can sting, unsettle, and rearrange. But in the long term, truth is always stabilizing. It is the ground your nervous system has been longing to stand on and to grow strong roots in.